Thank you, Hamida. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Thank you for being with us and welcome to our final and most awesome episode of Centering Justice, a revolution of the soul, deep democracy, leadership, and the work of founding America again. I'm Yodit Mesfin Johnson. I'm your host. And by now, y'all know that this has been a podcast about transforming the future together. I, along with a small group of amazing hosts and co-liberators, including Hamida Bhagirathi, who's here, Melvin Henley, Dr. Michelle Rodriguez, Jess Lita, Ryan Henyard, who have all been co-hosts and co-liberators of mine since April of 2020 when we started the pod. And since February, the journalist herself, catch that, journalist, Kija Gray, has been hanging on with me. And I said, so journey with me towards this walk home. Yeah. And today's special, y'all, Will Jones, News Next CEO, is in the house with us, along with Ashleigh Gardere from PolicyLink. And you'll get a chance to hear and meet and learn and just be in space with us. I should say about Kija, she is a cultural connector, a memory keeper, community nurturer, and she is one of my bestest sister friends. How you doing today? Don't you start crying this
I
early.
know it's too early. It's too early for that. It's too early for that. But um, before we get into this final episode, I just want to take a moment to speak to you, Yodi. Even before I met you, I remember seeing you on television talking about going back to Eritrea, about remembering your people and your story. And that moment stuck with me. I had manifested meeting you because I saw that story, and you were already doing what you've always done, which is allowing us to see ourselves more clearly and reminding us of our own magic. And so I want to thank you for letting me walk with you on this part of the journey. It's been truly the gift of a lifetime for me. And as you step into your rest, which means not disappearing, but returning to yourself, I hope you feel how deeply you really are loved and how much you are appreciated, and that we see you and that we thank you. And I'm excited for this season in your life. And I'm grateful for the way everything has aligned. You know, you are a gift. And as for me, I think you're going to ask me how I'm arriving into the space today. Grounded, grateful, and really clear that something sacred is happening. So, what would it take for us to build an America for all? I think it starts with us remembering that we belong to each other, that democracy isn't just about politics, it's how we show up in our homes, in our neighborhoods, with our neighbors, and how we care for each other, love and care. And it asks us to be honest, to be soft, and to dream of something better than just getting by. And I believe we can do it as long as we do it together. That's what I'm offering today.
Thank you for that. Um, ooh, there was a lot in that. I have often referred to centering justice as a spiritual home for me. And part of that is because it's been a place that when I needed to cry, to tell the truth, to laugh, to grieve, to imagine out loud with the people who I know and am connected to, who are already practicing, prefiguring, and dreaming the future that I want, not just for myself, but for others. And so, in April 2020, we were locked in our houses. If that weren't the case, I would be gathering people in my living room, right? I would have been gathering in my place of worship, but we weren't able to do that. And I desperately needed that place to gather and to convene with the lovers of humanity, with the doers, with the seekers, the folks like me, come on, full Pisces, everything Pisces, that are want and long for something better that is rooted in love, radical love, right? Is rooted in hope. And I needed a place to challenge the narratives that were rising in our field. And it is true that I think one of the gifts that I have is the ability to speak the truth in love. And I'm grateful for that because it wasn't always the case, and that is as a result of a lot of healing work. And I needed to be able to say what I'm watching happen as the pandemic was unfolding. And we already knew that it was going to have adverse impacts on Black and Brown people. We knew that. We had been hollering what was going to transpire for centuries. And we were grieving. And I believe that we need community to grieve with, and we need folks that'll help hold our families and our teams and our communities. And so many of us were experiencing vicarious trauma by watching Black bodies continue to fall in the streets, and laying bare what many of us already knew, that our deaths are systemic and illegal and devastating. And I couldn't get in the streets at that time. And so this became a place to do my part, in the movement work of creating a America for all. New is a place-based intermediary. Like, we help nonprofits get their boardrooms together and their IT and their bookkeeping, but and we're contributing to an ecosystem. Not all of our team are organizers or activists, but I really believed that we had a responsibility to use our institutional privilege and platform to speak the truth, and to connect the dots between what was happening in our sector and what was unfolding in the streets. And we're going to get into that a little bit, because if we didn't tell those stories, if we didn't amplify the voices of those pushed to the margins, who would? And so we launched the podcast as an act of faith. And we didn't know what the hell we were doing. I think it started more like a workshop that we did a podcast. We had slides and speakers, but we found our footing. It really was an act of faith. And like bell hooks, we don't see margins as purely sites and places of exclusion. They are also sites of radical imagination. And that is where Centering Justice situated. It's why I started it. And it is because I still believe that we have the agency collectively to build the world that we need. I will never stop believing that is possible. And so 5 years later, Monday is my last official day as CEO of New, and the end of a 17-year career here. And we've been planning this transition for a couple of years, mostly because one of our core values at the time was investing in our people. And I believe your values are baseless if you can't see them in practice, if you can't see them in action. And so initially, as part of supporting a trial succession plan while I was away on sabbatical, and then coming back and validating that, yeah, we could do this with some refinements. A year ago, I asked Will if he would consider this role, and he said yes. And so I am proud to pass the baton to someone that not only do I deeply admire, but I love. And Will, you know that love is a core value of mine. And yet I came up at a time, professionally where you would never say that. You would never, it was zeros and ones and plans and outcomes. But I love you. I love who you are. I love what you represent. I love your character. I love your creativity. I love the way I watch you interact with your daughters. I love the way I watch you interact with our team. I love the way that you listen deeply, and even when you're afraid, you push through. And I can not tell you what it means to me to see the culmination of this ascension and growth that you've had at New, be, for us to be here, and on Tuesday for you to lead this organization forward, Will. And I would say one more thing, and then I'll get you and Ashleigh in. I am not leaving because there's a problem. I'm not leaving because somebody offered me another job. I'm not leaving because, I'm ill or God, thank God. I am leaving because I want to. Because I want to explore what it looks like to remix and mix up my interests and curiosities and the things I've learned, and to reclaim my time, if you will. And the truth is, I have one child who I think the world of, even though he drives me crazy every day right now. I love you, Tyson. And he's going to be out of my house in a couple of years. And I want some time with him, And if you were at our Passing the Torch event last week, you probably heard a little bit of this, which is I've been dragging that baby around everywhere since he was in the womb, And so I want to get that time in. I don't want to have any regrets. Okay. So this moment is guided by love, by community, and in addition to being a sort of quasi spiritual home, there is an ancestral presence in Centering Justice. Every episode has been a spiritual download and with an ancestral blessing upon it. And so I just invoke in this moment the ancestors that prayed that Ashleigh, you would be who you are and would be here. Will, that your ancestor who was on the boat that arrived in 1619, I know is singing in glory, that you are sitting here in this moment. And Kija, from Canada to the Grenadines to the east side of Detroit, I know with every fiber in my being that your ancestors prayed for you to be here in this moment, who you are and what you do. And so you are each, we are, and those of you in the audience are miracles. You are a miracle. And that is what I'm holding. And so I do want to shout out Monique Stanton, who put me in touch with my girl crush, Ashleigh Gardere, who y'all are going to meet. But as we end the pod and move towards the future, I really am asking, like a lot of you, what it would take to build an America for all. I want to understand, as we've studied deep democracy all season long, what does a real democracy ask of us, not just politically, but soulfully and structurally. Um, so there we are, y'all. We here. Tears are welcome. Our ancestors are welcome. Our descendants, who we're dreaming of and praying for, we call them in as well. One of the questions I've asked all 5 years that we've had the pod is I've asked folks to bring themselves into space, and it is because we contain multitudes. These are all accomplished professionals with many receipts on this Zoom, but I just want to invite each of you to bring yourself, your people, your communities in. And Ashleigh, would love to have you begin, and then we'll same with you. Welcome.
Wow. There is something about an invitation. I am so grateful for the invitation to be with you all today. Many invitations, most of them come with, we don't know what to expect. And I am now clear that this was ordained for me to be right here in this space. And I need you to also know how honored I am, how deeply honored I am that I would be invited to be a part of a closing conversation of something so special and so important. And you're wrong for making me go first, just for the record. I was trying to adjust to this new space, and really that wasn't fair, but that's all right. Because there's something about an invitation. So my parents, Paul and Lynetta Gilbert, they believe in community and abundance. They are the kind of folks who there is always more than enough. There's always room. And so, what I mean by that is that biologically, I have one sister. That's technically it. But if we had to count based on how many people had keys to our house, I always undercount. Just lots of siblings in New Orleans and spread across the nation at this point. But the reason that I invoke Lynetta and Paul is because they met at Howard University. My dad went and fought in Vietnam. And when he got back, my mom was clear that she did not want to be an Army wife. And so he took a civilian post at the Navy base here in New Orleans. And so we were raised here. And in New Orleans, like, family is everything. And so the idea that I wouldn't have like a biological grandmother and cousins and all of that, like, that's a whole thing. Like, you can't do 17 school projects just because like, if you don't have that. And but they moved, as soon as they got here, they joined a Black Baptist church. And when I tell you that love overflowed in that church community, I ended up with 2 New Orleans grandmothers and church cousins turned siblings and aunties and uncles, more than I can count. But the reason that I'm carrying them with me today is because when I was 8, the church split. And, we had gotten a new young pastor, and some of the elders were not with Black liberation theology. And we had a tough business meeting on a Friday. And when we got to church on Sunday, the locks were changed. And so we had church on the empty lot outside. And it was such a formative experience. First of all, it was 8. So you could imagine just how terrified the children were and the adults were, that grown folks were cutting up. But after we had church that Sunday, standing up on the lot, we realized we could found something new. And we did. We founded a new church. And so at 8 years old, I got to be a part of asking questions about, well, what would our values be? And how do we want to show up in the world? And what would we want our contribution to New Orleans to be? And so all of that was a long way of saying, not only do I bring Paul and Lynetta Gilbert into this conversation, but I bring Audrey Jackson Johnson and Liesta Edwards, my two New Orleans grandmothers, and all the church cousins and siblings and aunts and uncles who taught me that even in crisis, unexpected crises, existential breakdowns, where the things that you trust the most fall apart, there is always an opportunity to redefine, to remake, to rebuild something better and even more awesome than we ever dreamed of. And so I'm bringing them with me into today's conversation.
That was a whole sermon in and of itself. Shoot.
Yes.
And cue the choir.
Right. Come on. Oh, Ashleigh, thank you so much for just even hearing you reframed some of the things that I wanted to name about the identities and the communities and the people that I'm coming into the space with. So, hey everyone, Will Jones the third, he, him, uh, incoming CEO at New, which is a wild trip. And here we are, after 7 years of being with the organization. You're gonna see me. I'm gonna be like looking off a little bit because right now I am in Deep Gap, North Carolina, which is in the Blue Ridge Mountains, part of the Appalachian Mountain range. And I'm here with my wife's family, my family, but you know, her biological family for a cousin's wedding. And on the other side of the mountain range, on the Virginia side, is actually where my folks live. And my dad's part of my dad's ancestry is from, we have ancestral land that has been in our family for over 100 years in these mountains. So even though this particular part of the range is not familiar to me, it is all familiar, it is all home. Um, and that's, you know, a beautiful thing that I've been able to have as my wife and I met at Michigan State, you know, two college kids not knowing each other, meeting through friends of friends and whatnot, multiple times. Our families, through just the circumstance, synchronicity, like we have these shared places. Um, so it's beautiful to be here. And a couple of things just to also name, like Yodit said, I'm a direct descendant of some of the original African folks who were kidnapped and brought to this United States. So my family can trace ourselves back to 1619. And the William Tucker Society is part of my lineage. So check us out if you haven't. We were part of the 1619 project, little mention in there. Um, so got to give a big shout out to Anthony and Isabel who made it across the passage, who survived, and then, you know, went on to have my ancestor, who I'm one of many Williams in our family named after William Tucker. Um, I'm the eldest son of William and Marion Jones, who, you know, similar to Ashleigh's family, found themselves raising a family in a city where they didn't have any blood relations, but were able to bring community around us. So I have aunts and uncles who are not blood, but who showed up at last week's party and have been at every milestone occasion in my life, and who love me, you know, deeper than blood could. So that is something that I'm eternally grateful for. Um, and I think as we continue to talk about this conversation of, you know, building an America for all and what that means, um, I am, you know, I'm in an interracial marriage. My wife is white, so the folks that I'm with today, predominantly white family. Um, and that has been something that I have been very privileged to experience throughout my life is my parents grew up in the civil rights era. They never shied away from making our family, our house, blackety black, black, black. Um, but even as folks that came up in the South, um, even as folks who, you know, on my mom's side, who she was raised in California because my grandparents had to leave the South because it got too dangerous for them. Um, taught me what it meant to love folks because they were human and not because of these constructed identities that, that some folks have placed onto us and told us that that's what that is. Um, so very grateful to be part of communities that have always been a reflection of what our whole human family looks like. Um, and to continue to show my girls what that future can look like. So one of the things that I'm always great, you might hear my daughter in the background right now. I don't know what she's doing, but she's having a good time. Um, so yeah, I'll leave it at that for right now, and we can get a little bit deeper into that as we get through the conversation. Thank y'all for having me today, and it's always a pleasure to be on Centering Justice.
Perfect. Well, I guess now that the floodgates are open, I want to ask you, when did you realize that your leadership was transforming, perhaps becoming more about soul work than anything else? That you weren't just doing the job, because you talked about when you started 7 years ago. So you started a job 7 years ago, but somewhere on this 7 year journey, something happened. Um, what would you say that defining moment was for you, that helped to transform you from then to now?
I think it's hard to pick a moment, Kija. I have been very, very lucky. I think I'm the only person. I said this, I've said it a couple times now because it's like a flex. I think I'm the only person who gets to say that I got to work directly for Yodit for 7 going on 8 years. So to find a single moment that has transformed is difficult. I would say, though, one of them was um, when I first moved when I moved from like the role that I was hired into I've had like 4 or 5 different roles at New, but into that next role. And it was a stretch, right? So at the time we had a chief development officer. It was time for her to move on to her next thing, and she was like, gave her notice and was going to leave the organization on great terms. But then we had kind of a gap to fill. And I knew I wasn't a chief development officer. I'd never raised a dollar before. I mean, I'd raised some little money for some other organizations that I've been part of and grew up. I'm an Eagle Scout, so I had been doing that kind of work for a long time, but had never raised, real organization money. Um, so I knew that that wasn't the case, but I asked, I was like, I think I might have some of the tools and the gifts that are kind of necessary to succeed in this kind of work. And I'm curious if y'all would be willing to take a shot. Um, and they did. And Yodit, kind of, talked to some of the other leaders at the organization, and came back to me and said, you know what? Yeah, we think you might have it. And for me, that was just a moment of understanding that what real leaders can and should do is really to see the potential in people. And I think oftentimes, we are given narratives around leadership of like, this person was perfect, they had it all figured out, and because they were perfect and they had it all together, that's why they became this next thing or what have you. But the trust and faith that we can put into each other um, is a really truly powerful and transformational thing. I'll think back to our first Centering Justice Unplugged a few years ago, which is like the in-person gathering that we were able to have once COVID had receded and we could get this community, this Centering Justice community together. And Sharonda Purnell, founder of the Cocoa Healing Collective, was one of the folks who spoke at that gathering. And she said, we ordain ourselves. And that was one of the things that continues to stick with me. And like, that's why I was saying, like, part of what Ashleigh was saying is a sermon, right? Because that faith and that trust that we put into each other really does makes the impossible possible. Um, and sometimes the things that we can't see for ourselves, somebody else can. And that little nudge or leap of faith that folks are willing to take can truly catalyze. And so it's something that I've tried to replicate in the opportunities that I've had. So even with, I know there's somebody else on this pod who has shown up for the last year and plays a background role. I got to give a shout out to Jess Carmichael, showrunner for this whole situation, and the communications and contributions coordinator at New. She does a lot of different things for us, y'all. But just, even Jess, the opportunity to work with her, and to kind of, try and instill that same faith that Yodit and Mike put in me, is something that I've tried to do in working with her. And if you have followed New in our brand over the past year and a half, 2 years that Jess has been here, you can see it. You can see it showing up. The ways that she has been able to unfurl and unlock her talents and gifts that apparently some folks who were dumb, they were clearly stupid, told her were not valuable. Um, to see that come through and breathe new life into the way that we show up, just absolutely incredible. So this is part of the legacy that I'm trying to carry forward, right? Is these gifts that Yodi and the folks before her have given to me. I'm getting a little teary just thinking about how amazing that experience has been and all that it has been able to yield. So um, that's a couple of things, Kija. I hope that.
Oh no, there are so many gems in that. There are so many gems in that. So thank you. Ashleigh, I want to ask you similarly, how you knew you were transforming, because the work at PolicyLink is so instrumental in being a guidepost, right? Um, how's that? I heard your piece about your church, and that just stuck with me. Like, that's powerful, right? How does that show up in the work that you're doing as we plan for the future? I'm interested in that.
Well, first, I was going to tell y'all this. I'll give you the short version. But when I was 14, I told you Black liberation theology. So we had a civil rights leader, we call him Big Duck, who would come to our church. And so I got to be a part of his social justice. I'm going to call it a ministry. It was really a camp for young people. But it was connected to 21st century youth leadership movement in Selma, Alabama. So Rose and Hank Sanders were the founders. And it was all about like making sure we were rooted in our history and understood the civil rights journey and all of that. And Will, you talked about imperfections. And so I'm gonna just lean in on imperfections. So I told you I was 14, but at that age, it was that time you're like, oh, I'm tired of being in group. So we went and like hung out in the room. We left. And when the grown folks came looking for us, I hid under the bed. Now, the only thing more embarrassing than hiding under the bed and shirking your responsibilities is when the people find you and you got to come up from underneath the bed. Remember, these are civil rights leaders. They paid the price, right? And that is I know, okay. The reason that is such an important part of my story, because at 14, I got all the way together. Like, it was like, that's the last time that I will ever be seen shirking my responsibilities. Now, there's a whole other journey about not learning the importance of rest and all of those things. But when you ask about transformative moments, transformational moments, that one, it sticks real good. And it was the moment that I felt like I was being asked to choose, was I serious or was I playing? And so every other thing. Now, remember, I live in New Orleans. It's from New Orleans. A whole hurricane named Katrina devastated not just my city, but all of those relationships that I told you about. And so in the rebuilding of a city, and I was 24 when I made my 25th birthday a couple days after Katrina. So my entire career has been one of building and redefining and reclaiming. So that story about hiding under the bed when I was 14, that was formative about, are you about this business or are you playing? And that was challenging in the context of a Southern city where I was doing work that we called equity work. And there are people who just did not want that, didn't want it. It's like, no, thank you. um, and and I still made that choice every day, to try to show up as my best self, imperfections and all, but to feel like I left it on the field on behalf of the people of New Orleans. But when I got to PolicyLink, all of a sudden, there's no fight here. Like, we've all agreed we want to build like, we believe in a different possibility for these United States, and we're going to work towards it. Like, put it all on the field to do that. What was transforming to me about getting to PolicyLink is the deep care. Not only, like, that was the first time it's like, oh, we saying love at work, right? And not just that we're saying it, but we are going to lean all the way into that thing, even on the hardest days, even
That's
when
right.
you have worked my nerves and you didn't do what you said you were going to do,
Oh.
and all of that.
Mhm.
Like, that there would still be love and grace and reconciliation and all of that. And that has been transforming to me, because I didn't realize, not just the technical education train, all those shiny sheets of paper that Yodit you referred to came with hazing, and it came with a learning of behaviors.
Yeah.
Even when we say we want something different, we learn how to behave like the system taught us to. And so
That's
I would say that one of the most transforming things for me since I've been at PolicyLink is that the person that I want to be, I get to be, and I'm held accountable for being, right? Like, that we're going to hold each other, and we're going to do right by each other, and we're going to be the most generous versions of ourselves that we can be. And when you need something and you ask for something, I'm always going to start from a position of yes. And then if we can't figure it, like, then we'll try to figure out how to move the barriers or whatever. But that feels like it has been transforming, to my leadership. And I would be remiss if I did not call out the name of Dr. Michael McAfee,
Come
our,
on.
because he is the person who modeled that, for me, things that I thought that I knew and understood. He showed me that there was so much more room. And so just,
So much more room. Oh, and by the way, you called in your parents and the spirit of abundance that now is present in your I begin with yes, right? Um, Last week, I sat in a reflective writing workshop with Alexis Pauline Gumbs, and we were working from Audre Lorde's Wild Hope poem that comes from Zami. And Audre wrote that when she was 14. And so, I tell y'all the ancestors show up here all the time. But in 1948, she also wrote All These, when she was 14. And one of the things she was saying then is, I want to leave something behind. What will my life mean? It's when she started to get a definition of survival about what is left behind as a result of our relationship. And so Alexis invited each of us, and we won't actually do this here, but I just would drop this because you made me think about, to welcome our 14-year-old selves. And part of the writing workshop was to, as Lord did, to write what we wanted. And that could, and to begin at 14 and to let it flow through. So I wanted to offer that, and I want to tie that to something that Michael, and that was really important to me, with Will, and that is, and Will was kind of touching on this. New is the first place. Every one of my bosses or leaders at New has been a person of color. And I've been in the workforce for, almost, not quite, 35 years, right? And what Will experienced in terms of us not making him perform is because we belong to communities and cultures that see leadership and wisdom across age, across experience, across identity, across, it is a construct that the attainment of a degree equates to, how to lead, right? It's good to build skills, right? It's good to refine those skills. But more importantly, when I was 60 days on the job when the pandemic hit, and there was no leadership playbook, right? For like leading in a pandemic. And it was the River Combahee Collective, Tony Cade and Laura, it was their Black womanist, framework that I looked to for how do we take care of each other in this moment. It was my grandmother who was born and lived during the Depression and knew how to, that phrase, make a dollar out of 15 cents, right? Like my grandmother taught me that. My mother, who I think sensed that something was awry in her health and brought a village around a decade before she would be diagnosed with Alzheimer's, so that there was never a moment where there wasn't a mother available to me, right? And that is my orientation to leadership, is you at the hem of my skirt teaching me, and you're in the rocking chair on the porch, teaching me. And I suspect that Dr. Angela Glover Blackwell, who, I first met and talked to, was thinking about that as well when I witnessed her in 2018 pass the torch to Michael, who then passes it to you, right? So this idea of co-founding, it's my child at home is co-founding what the future of our family looks like, right? That's not purely for me to decide. We're doing that. And last summer, I, like Michael, I earned a sabbatical that was funded by, I think I saw Kate here, by the McGregor Fund out of Detroit. And I got a chance to take my baby back to my grandmother in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, for him to meet her for the first time. He'd only ever seen her on video. And it was there that I learned that President Biden had decided to step back from the race. And a Black woman was given 90 days to, run for office. And I had a pit in my belly that day that our democracy might not, as we knew it, might not survive. And that feeling is what led me to the season and the exploration of deep democracy, not as a concept, but as a call, a way of seeing democracy that isn't about voting or policy, but really about relationships, about grief, about asking who else needs to be here, about sitting in conflict, right? And not throwing anybody away. That a deep democracy is one that recognizes we really do need all of us, right? Not some of us. And now, even since our last episode where Kija and Chase And Lauren and I talked about the like longing for joy in the work, longing for humanity in the work. We have seen just in 30 days more people kidnapped, disappeared, children and women and innocent people being unalived in Palestine, in Congo, in Sudan, so-called preemptive wars being started in Iran, our social safety nets dismantled in real time, and humanists, many of whom comprise this centering justice community, are heartbroken. And we're putting our feet to the streets for sure, but I just want to make some space for the way in which so many of us are watching the work that has been our lifetime erased with one executive order or one tweet or a missile at a time that threatens not just our well-being today, but the well-being of our future. And still, in January of 2020, and I got to give a shout out to Maurice Mitchell and his essay that really catalyzed this idea that we cannot purely focus on what's broken. That we have to, and for me, this comes from a deep faith, believe deeply that there's something more. And while some of us, because we all got a role, will be working on breaking the bad, and we need that, and we are deeply grateful to those who do that. And others of us will be weavers, and others of us will be the helpers. We need those who are focused on building what's next, and a future where joy and humanity is a part of the strategy, where we do all get to thrive. And so when I read, Ashleigh, the Revolution of the Soul essays that PolicyLink published, I think it was also the theme of y'all's conference and year last year. You'll fill in those gaps for me. Something really stirred. I want to tell you that I was sitting in one of my favorite coffee shops with one of my dearest friends, who we had both confessed that we bought like 50, 11 books and hadn't read none of them because we were so busy. And so we said, well, okay, I can't read a book, but I could read these essays. And we went to the coffee shop to really hold each other accountable. And we read, and then we talked for hours about what was in that piece, and then would go on to listen to the podcast. And so I was in some way, manifesting you here, Ashleigh, because I believe what you and the folks there, and I know so many others who have contributed to this, this thinking that y'all are doing. I really just wanted to hear about this vision of an America for all stance that y'all have taken, and walk us through. You use the language of co-founder of a multiracial democracy, not just reformers of the old, but creators of the new. Tell us more, Ashleigh, about what that is. What is this stance you speak of? What is this Pollyanna-ish America for all? You know, I know it's some side eyes. I can't see everybody in the audience, but that's okay. That's okay. I want to hear more.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out where to start. We've been talking about journeys, so I think I'm going to keep with that. So the first 20 years of my career, rooted in New Orleans. I got here the year before Katrina, so it was just enough time to know that I wanted to be home. And then everything else was then after the hurricane took away everything. And so my journey was one about like, who do we want to be, and who can New Orleans become? And remember, PolicyLink was only 5 years old when Katrina hit. And so Angela's decision to open an office in New Orleans, because like we're saying this word equity, people don't know what we're talking about, but the rebuilding of an American city with equity at this, that she saw that there was a real opportunity there. And so you can also take from that, like my whole career, like PolicyLink, it tracks with PolicyLink's arc. And so long story short, we, a whole collection, like you said, like this took everybody. We did all the right things, right? FSG got collective impact, right? People at the center. We start with people at the center. Data-driven decision making. We're doing all of it. and but the thing that I was charged with leading was a citywide economic opportunity strategy. We saw the needle move, right? Like the data point that was driving us was that 52% of working age Black men were not working. And as we engaged Black men, recruited them as leaders and to drive the initiative, all of that, and we layered on all the best practices, we did all the things. And we saw that needle move from 52% to 43.9%. That's doing something, right? But it only took 3 to 5 years for the needle to just slide right on back. So when I went home and asked my husband, can I quit my job, please, and just sit down? Because I'm tired. And this is a level of grief. Like I need to grieve what just happened, right? And so I came home. I did reach out to PolicyLink to see if I get one of those little fancy fellowships that people get, so I could just sit and think and whatever. Well, that turned into me now being at PolicyLink and all of that, but different story. But I did still take the 3 months to grieve. And then when I got to PolicyLink, I felt like I was fancy sabbatical. Yes, I felt like I was meeting Michael, who was also grieving. Like he came to PolicyLink to scale the Harlem Children's Zone model as Promised Neighborhoods initiative in the Obama years. So similarly, 300,000 children were impacted, right? Like supporting their families, all of that. Did all the same, like the right things, all the best practices. But did we ever close the racial wealth gap? No. Did we ever, right? Like any of the measures that would be real talk, not like your grant report, grant deliverable measures, but like, is the nation transformed because of what I did? Is New Orleans transformed because of what I did? No, the answer is no. And so we were dealing with that and asking the question, why wasn't it enough? And part of what we realized was like, oh, the thing was never designed for everybody's thriving. Like we didn't build this thing for everybody's collective flourishing, right? And so, as an organization, the more we dug deeper and deeper, it was like, oh yeah, so this was built to govern for some, but not all. That there is a hierarchy of human value, right? Like everybody doesn't matter the same. And the people who we've decided don't matter are systematically excluded from changing the rules, right? That's the truth that we have to start with. And if that's so, then the smartest policy interventions, the most engaged of community engagement strategies, they'll never be enough. We actually have to tend to the design flaws. And so that's where we took on we decided our leadership stance would be a founder stance, because that's where the design happens. And so if we're gonna have to take on the continued design of the nation, we gotta be as sassy and as fierce as founders, right? And so, but here's the catch.
I have tingles.
Oh,
Yes.
Catch though. So if you decide you want to be sassy and want to get in the big game, and one that is about governing, right? Because we can all be about our people, me and mine, my tribe. We can do that all day, so long as it's about our little individual experience and our personal, like how I feel good and safe or whatever. But when we're talking about governing, then the condition of being a co-founder is that you have to be willing to govern for all, which we've never done.
No.
We've never done. And so that whole thing about the revolution of the soul, which is, it's a whole thing. It's a, just no, I'm about to tell you why it's a thing, right? Like that takes a level of work that's not about that thing I'm trying to fix over there. It has to start right here. Do I have
inside out work? Come on.
Do I have a soul? Can I manifest a soul if I don't have it? Can I manifest a soul that can love all? Can I? Right? And so the more we've gotten into this, and recognizing it, that that's the first work, and that there are, we talk about a founder stance. We've also learned that there's a certain set of capacities that we have to have, right? Foresight is one of them, which I feel like you talked about earlier, Yodit, about just even looking forward to say like, so what's the future new going to be, right? But foresight is one, radical imagination, which you talked about earlier, audacity, that I'm bold enough to think that I also get to be a designer of this nation. I see you, Ingrid. Right? Humility. So how we balance audacity and humility, right? Like that I'm not going to be, it's going to take all of us. Like this founding moment will not be a couple dozen dudes held up in a room cussing, fussing, and splitting wigs. It's going to be this is going to be national conversations that we have to have, right? A love for all, which I already spoke to. And then the hardest one, at least for me, self-renewal. I have to be willing to consider that there's something that I'm doing right now that is no longer in service to me, no longer in service to the work, no longer in service to this nation. And that's real hard to do under these current circumstances and the soundtrack that is playing every day while we're trying to do this work. So I know that was way longer than I had intended to respond, but there's something more required of us individually that will then help in the transformation of the systems and the structures, and we don't get to skip that.
I mean, we could say, and you have said, that the current national regime, which is what I refer to them as, have foresight. I mean, they're playing chess with the Democrats. They have a radical imagination. They even have audacity. But those last three, humility, love for all, and self-renewal, they are grossly lacking in. And I see this as like a group of ingredients. All of these things need to be present. Will, I want to turn your way because you and I, have been meeting more often. And one of the things that I shared with you, we did a vlog, a passing the torch vlog, and I was saying to you that a skill that I think is, or an attribute, a competency that, you don't see it on job descriptions of CEOs, but is present as intuition. That has been, and I've had people who work on our team really push back on that, right? Like we can't just use our intuition, to make decisions. And I always like to say Harriet had fainting spells and woke up with the idea of how to get 70 people free and 700 freer. Ashleigh, I will also say that more than once I have said on this podcast that if you look at the arc of social justice, racial justice movement from the continent forward, it has been that every time Black women have gotten free, so has everyone else. And so that is why I look to Black leadership, not Black womanist leadership, not in an exclusive way, right? But I'm looking at foresight and radical imagination and audacity and humility and self-renewal. And I cannot imagine a world where I would do half of what I've seen the leaders of this country do to other human beings. I don't care what identity they had, right? Who they loved, where they know from, what the color of their skin. Like I could not imagine that. And I am very well aware that that is because I am the descendant of the birther of civilization. And she was anointed by an awesome creator who wanted each of us here to fulfill a purpose and endowed and imbued in us these characteristics that you speak of. So, Will, would you add competencies that we need in addition to what Ashleigh shared? And I guess in general, maybe a follow up, like, what are your thoughts on the risk and responsibilities of reclaiming that we in the we the people?
Yeah. Again, I just gotta like, Ashley, that was a whole word. That was, just very, very grateful to be in this digital presence with you. Um, I think it's a lot of what I'm thinking about right now is the willingness to heal. And I think that's deeply connected to self-renewal, deeply connected to humility too, in the ways that you've talked about it, for us to understand the way, because like I come from the perspective that the only reason that these other folks are willing to hurt is because they've been hurt. And that's a cycle of trauma that has been experienced for generations, right? And sorry, y'all, I don't know if you could hear it. There's some thunder rolling through. I'm protected, but I apologize if it gets loud. Um, So, the willingness to like sit with the pain that we might individually be feeling, and to heal through that. And I know that that's not a thing that comes easy, and it's not a thing that we have to do on our own either, right? So when we talk about like the we, it really feels important to be in right relationship with ourselves and the folks around us so that we can show up for each other in those healing journeys. Um, I don't know how to like, and I think that um, permeates throughout, right? Because in order to truly love others in an unconditional way, we have to kind of learn to love ourselves unconditionally, and that can only kind of happen. And I'm not saying that I've got that figured out, but what I understand it to mean is that we have to love ourselves unconditionally first, and to be willing to move through that imperfection and the harm and the pain and all of the things, in order to get to that place where we can recognize the pain that others are carrying and moving through. Because, I think a lot of the times, folks, we can see systems as things that are bigger than us, um, but they're always upheld by us, right? Every day we make a choice to move forward with a policy or a practice that somebody might have codified, but like each of us still has the autonomy and agency to actually like carry that out. And so in order to push back or to put forward something new, like we have to take that on, um, and be willing to take that next step, which is often the hardest step. Um, so I think that feels really key and critical, um, in this work to reclaim that we. Um, as far as other competencies, there's something about deep listening that's coming up for me, and listening to each other, listening to our spirits. And that's why I think this piece around intuition feels important and not something that can be lost. Um, And I think, like Ashleigh was saying, like we data informed decision making is important, but I think that sometimes we can like that term data gets isolated to numbers and surveys and things like that when like data is what your neighbor told you that they were experiencing, or what you have picked up from conversations at the library or wherever it is that you're convening with folks, because our truths are real. Those are data. That is valid too. It's not just zeros and ones, like you were saying before, Yodit, that our stories are data. Um, and so taking the time to listen and truly understand each other, and understand ourselves is really important. And then I think coming back to that piece about we all have different roles to play, right? Because particularly in times like this, um, some folks are going to be the people who can and need to respond quickly, right? When kids' parents are getting picked up off the street, we need folks who are going to come in and find spaces where those children can be safe. We need people who are going to come forward and fight for those families to be returned to each other. Um, and we also need folks who are going to do the slow work that's going to be necessary to include the folks that have been pushed to the margins and get them back into the center. And to your point, Ashleigh, to be truly like co-founders with and for each other, that is going to take time and it's going to take some space. Um, and so I think it does take a willingness to really evaluate like where are your gifts, where are your passions, what are you being called to, what can you contribute and do in a way that only you can do. And I think all of us are on that journey because it changes through the many chapters of our lives and it's going to look different in different contexts, right? Um, and it's one of the things that even as I move into this next season and have been ordained by my community to take on this new role that I'm figuring out for myself, like, okay, what does it look like now and in the next chapter? And I'm excited to see what that looks like for Yodit too. I have been, I'm not going to say the thing that I've been asking her to do because she does not want it, but sometimes the leadership that folks have displayed in one season has looked like this might need to look like something else next. She hates
I
me for
am
this.
not running for office
I
again.
didn't say it. I didn't
It's
say
not
it.
happening.
You said it. I didn't say it. Um, and there's some people in the audience that I can see right now. They're like, "Oh, that's not the bad idea." But yeah, the willingness for us
Neersha, I
to
see you. Put your hand down right now.
that willingness to kind of ask and understand, like what is needed of me now, what can I contribute now? Because we are in this is not a 4-year journey, it's not a 16-year journey. This is something that I think um isn't even, in many ways, not even a 200-year journey. If we can look at what the past 200 years of this like formalized country has been, but even the 200 years that preceded that in order for them to get to that point, right? So um, if we do truly want to make this country in America for all, then we have to be willing to relinquish that it's not gonna happen overnight or in our lifetimes, but that we still have important roles to play in making the big vision real. Um, so those are a little bit of what is coming up for me as we kind of think about like the competencies, the responsibilities that we have to take on. And then I think for some folks, I think it's important for like the risk is that we interrogate that yes, some things are going to change, right? And that change can be uncomfortable. One of the things that we've talked about, and I'm glad to see Hamida on here, because at New we have these like co-created ways of being for how we want to show up for each other and ourselves in moving the work forward, right? And one of the things that she and I worked on when we were doing the last iteration of that is like the discomfort of growth, that we have to be willing to embrace and steep in that, because that's what it's going to be. That things aren't going to look the way that they have, and that's what we want. And so to move through um, this new co-creation, this continued co-founding, is being comfortable with the uncomfortable. Um, and that can sometimes feel like a loss. And yet, if we have done, I think, that work to deeply listen to who we are, what we truly want, and go back to what Ashleigh was saying, like, am I playing about this or am I serious about it? If we are serious, then there's an understanding and acknowledgement that what we're going to get on the other side of this is going to be 1,000 times better, and it's gonna manifest in ways that we could not ever possibly imagine. So I think back to, I'm sure, what the fear of some of the white slave owners was when, emancipation happened and people started to get free and Black folks started to build for themselves and started to create, business. And they could not ever imagine what kind of contributions this, collaborative of different racial identities and cultures would bring to this country. And yet now we get to experience the beautiful tapestry of what that looks like on a regular basis, right? And we see it happen in art, in culture, in the music, in the food that we eat, in the movies that we watch, the books that we read. All of that is a blessing and a gift that nobody could have predicted would manifest in these ways. And so just the encouragement to, if you're feeling that discomfort, to lean into faith a little bit, that the thing that'll come on the other side, like, is going to be better than we could possibly imagine. And the Yodit mentioned us as a miracle. So sometimes we interchange that with like the wildest dream. It's going to be beyond our wildest dreams. So that's.
Oh, thank you. Oh my goodness. Like, I'm just over here. I can't even tell you.
Jewels dropping everywhere.
Jewels.
Jewels. Yes.
And for that, I just give so much thanks, right? There's so much joy in the possibility. And I think often about how in this country, one of the notes I was writing was that we've normalized doing things in perpetuity. So, enslavement for Africans was meant there was never an end in sight. There was never a season. And even the history of America is written in this linear fashion, where we know as people of the global majority that there are seasons and cycles. We're in a season right now. And even though the season seems like a harsh winter, we know that there is joy in the midst of that we can find that. And so I was thinking about a few things when you were talking, and one of those for me is a daily practice, small practices, right? So let me watch my language here. Bugs and I don't have the best relationship. There are water bugs in my house. They come up because there's a lot of rain. They're big, they're yucky. And my instinct when I'm afraid of something is to kill it. But if that's my instinct on a one-on-one level, me and Mr. Bug, and I don't want that in the wider world, that's not what I'm calling into my consciousness, that when you're afraid of something that you don't understand, that you kill it, then in my small daily interactions, I must be willing to make a different choice, right? So I let the bug have the kitchen the other day. He just stayed in the sink. I don't know where he went. Honestly, I didn't kill him. I don't know where he went, but I went out to grab some takeout because that just seemed the better option at the time. And nobody was harmed in the making of this. I also let a wasp out of my house, right? All of those things, as silly as they seem, they speak to a larger thing for us. How are we willing to show up when we're afraid? How are we willing to show up? If we want something better, what does our daily practice look like? What does it mean when I say I love you and I care for you? What does that mean? Because if I can do that daily, then I can do that with my next door neighbor. Then I can expand that to my block. Then I can expand that to my hood. And then I can expand that to my country and America for all. But it starts with me and Mr. Bug, right? And so, Ashleigh, I just want to, come back to some of what you talked about earlier. I'm thinking about currency because right now, the people who have the ducats, the money, the oligarchs, they have the money, but we have other currencies. And in our America for all, I guess I would like you to share what those currencies and how we can leverage some of those other currencies to show up in this world, in an America for all. What would that look like?
Um, so uh one of the things you were thinking about, and you mentioned just a second ago, was about in our daily practice. Um, so I have a lot of hard days these days. We all do, right? Like yesterday was like just a really like it was just a yucky, not good, right? It's one of those where you just literally are. There's a set of values that I hold, and I will not break them, right? But the humans. And so maybe that's part of it, is just like you and Mr. Bug. It's just like what I've at least committed to these 6 capacities. And so how do I start to practice moment to moment? Am I showing up with humility? Right? Am I showing up, right? With love for all? We it's become like a little bit of a joke at policy, like all means all means all, right? When somebody's cutting up and acting crazy. Um, but yesterday, and I don't know that I'm answering your question well, but after that, um, one of my sons had a basketball game, 2 of them, 2 basketball games. And I've learned over the last couple of years that the basketball schedule ends up being, I should use it as foresight, right? Like, oh, this is going to be a terrible day because there's a basketball game right here. And I now get to use the basketball games. In order to cheer, you have to shout, right? I can't cheer for the team without being loud with it. That has become the most amazing outlet of that stuff that we just are holding in our bodies, right? And so I had my arm around Jaden as we were walking into the gym, and I just revealed this secret to him. I was like, all right, y'all getting ready to play? And I've always been the loud mama. No matter the sport, I am the loud mama. But it has become a different kind of ministry, even inside of this. So I could tell you that, like, yes, it's family time and like radical self-care and all of those kind of practices, but at least over the last 24 hours, I've been really processing this gift of not just being present to support them, but that God actually gave me this outlet, which is a joyful one, but I get to release the other stuff too with it. And so that's one of the things. And I think for us to be able to find what are those like steadying anchors, because the cutting up is not going to stop. But what can get me just a little bit grounded so that I can start this day over with the same commitment to those same capacities and being integrous in my practice of them.
That's so good. So both you and Will have talked about that inner work, right? That one of the paths to humility and love for all is metabolizing unprocessed grief, trauma, upset, right? That's incredibly important. I can't remember which of you mentioned it, but this like spirit of, I think it was you, this spirit of experimentation, which can feel really dysregulating. And yet, which is to say, like, is it, you mentioned governance earlier, Ashleigh, and when I think of that word right now, I think of something I'm learning called sociocracy, which is peer-based governance and stewardship that's rooted in consent. So just this, it's a process, it's a way of thinking about governance, and it's really resonant to me because it presumes that there is power within instead of power over or under, right? And I am increasingly questioning and curious if this kind of representative governance model that we have is sufficient to get to the nuance that you talked about in terms of, an America for all, right? That, and I'll be more specific so folks understand where I'm coming from. We watched in this most recent election where you have what the people want and you have what the donors want, right? And often who's controlling what the outcomes of the election are in fact the donors. And I will say broadly that you identify as Democrat or progressive, the majority of those donors are what Dr. King called the moderate white liberal. And by that, I mean that while they espouse democratic values, it is up to the point with which it requires them to lose the comfort associated with their position and lot in life, right? And you see the same thing, Will and I and you, Ashleigh, work in a nonprofit, and we too serve multiple masters, right? The community, and the use of the word master wasn't great, but in this context, right? Like, let's say two customers. So you have the community for whom is the benefactor or the beneficiaries of the provision of service. And then you have the donor, right? Or the foundation or the funder or who have you. And often there is a chasm between what community needs, not just to have their unmet needs serviced, but to have it transformed so that they no longer have to be a part of that. And you have a donor that is incentivized to contribute not to the eradication of the issue, but to contribute in a way that allows them to shelter their wealth, right? So we have, in many ways, these invisible actors that are shaping the experience that we're having. And now I want to move to another frame, which is I would call myself like a recovering reformist or a baby abolitionist, right? And a lot of that emerged through lots of work trying to reform the prison industrial complex. When I was 15 years old, my first love got involved in a situation and his family couldn't afford legal representation. And a core memory of mine is the moment where, by that time, he had just turned 19, where a 19-year-old child is sentenced to 25 years in prison. And I can't conceive of it. And when people, hear stories of navigating the prison system, I live those experiences of having, my body policed, of spending ungodly amounts of money to support your loved one, of having them disappeared from community. So I've participated in oversight work and police reform efforts and trained police on implicit bias and done this thing and done that thing. And still, right, by 2020, we see a man put his knee in another man's neck and take his life away. And I think it was at that point that, you said earlier, like, I will often say we're tinkering in broken systems, but you really said it the right way. The systems are working as they were intended, and they were not intended for all of us. So I, really started to identify with the values of abolition. And yet a flaw is that if we can't help people who feel unsafe see the bridge between police and community safety, then we're not going to get to that abolitionist future state. So we have gotten good at, you know, wagging the finger or critiquing the system, or even blocking, right, the success, the progress. But if we were to, and one of the reasons why this piece around abolition is so important to me is often the folks who push back are middle-aged Black women who are the most unsafe in this country, right? And so I need, like, the curiosity and the experimentation where I started is that just like it's walking out of the house with the bug, Kij, it's what can I do today to keep my neighbor safe? What conversation can I have today that puts a pause on you calling the police before we try to resolve the conflict, without them, right? Or how can, the other day, I was packing my car up. It was late. I got distracted. This, that's a whole thing that happens all the time now. Perimenopause. Thank you very much. But it got late. I came out to my car just as my neighbor was walking up. He said, "Hey, I was about to ring the doorbell because your garage is open. You all right?" Right? So I wanted, the America for all is the bug. It's the, we check on each other. It's the, we stomp our feet, we yell at the basketball game, right? To metabolize, to complete the stress cycle, because there is no possible way that we can radically imagine a future when we're burnt out, we're tired, we're stressed, we're not eating well, we are hateful, right? And it's easy to be hateful right now. And our assertion last month was that joy and love and humility and these other things are a form of resistance, right? To not choose to internalize the the sick water that we're in. Will, I want to come to you for a sec in the spirit of experimentation and kind of laboratories, right? You hear that a lot now. There's lab this and lab that and lab the other. What does it require for folks here that are like, okay, Ashleigh, okay, Will, okay, Yodit and Kija, I'm on board for an America for all. What will it require for institutions like New by Nirja? Thanks for being with us, to be labs for this kind of democracy building. And how do you see your leadership, Mr. CEO on Tuesday, contributing to that kind of, like almost the DNA of organizational transformation? And I'm curious about that question from you too, Ashleigh. And as we near the end, basically the end, if you have any final thoughts. And then we have, folks, if you need to hop, we understand. We have one last little video presentation before we wrap up. So, Will, you want to take a couple of minutes there? Maybe Ashleigh can, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief here, y'all. One of the identities that I didn't name earlier, but that I think really helps shape my perspective on this, is I'm a musician. I've been playing the saxophone since I was 10 years old. And it's all, and I've had the privilege of becoming at different points in my musical journey, like, very proficient at my instrument. And so I know that what it took to get there was practice, thousands and thousands of hours of practice, putting my lips on the horn, doing the scales, doing the exercises. And so that's, I think, the thing that, like, I cannot state enough, is that we have to be willing to practice and to sometimes hit the wrong notes, and then to get back on the instrument and practice it again. So to me, the incorporation of love into how we show up for ourselves, for each other, including our teammates at these institutions, and then being willing to take that and weave it into the policy and systems that hold those institutions together, so that when new folks come and other folks are leaving, that there's still, it's ingrained into who we are, um, is critically and vitally important. We cannot get to this mastery of this America that we want to be, or these visions for these institutions, just by simply attending a training, listening to a podcast, doing the thing one time and thinking that it's sunk in. It hasn't. We got to be willing to practice it. And so that's one of the things that I'm trying to bring to new, is just like a continuation of the willingness to practice the values and ideals that we espouse. So yeah, I know we're up at time. I want to hand things over to Ashleigh, but that's my 2 cents on that.
Just gonna pick up where you left off, Will. Like, and the practice is in the work. I think what I've learned is that my healing is actually inside the work. That I'm not, even when I've had the chance to do the retreat stuff and whatever, it's good in the moment, but the actual healing is coming inside of being able to practice a new way, and see others practice a new way, and to practice standing in solidarity with each other, right? In the different roles that we choose to hold. And so, yeah, we might consider that our healing will come through the work.
I just want to take this moment. Thank you. Thank you. If the only prayer we have is thank you, that's enough. And so, Will, I want to say welcome on Tuesday. Ashleigh, your continued work, your continued healing. Yodit, well, I can't. In this moment, I can't. But you already know. If you know, you know. And so I want to give you the last word, sis, and say thank you.
What a run. Thank you to so many of you who poured into me over the years and poured into this beautiful, beloved community. I'm not going far. In fact, I will come back in August to support Will and to support some other work with New part-time and contractually. And honestly, I invite you to come along with me over the next 6 months in your own practice, to just listen for what you're being called to in this democracy for all. That is what this season for me is just listening. It's not driving, not planning, not setting the next this, that, and the other. Something I've never done before. I've never had my ass out here like this, ever, ever, ever. And it is uncomfortable, but it is what I feel called to do in this moment. So just a deep bow of gratitude to all of you. That's it. And Kija, thank you for being with me. And the last is off mine, but from the moment I met you, I knew that you were somebody special. And I just thank you for letting me bear witness as you walked, more and more into your gifts and your offerings. And I've learned so much from you, so much of how to human from you. And I'm deeply grateful that you came, that you stayed, and that you said yes. Yeah. Now the tears are welling up. We're gonna call this cut, except Jess has this really beautiful thing she put together. So if you can stick around, great. If not, don't forget, all 5 years are on New's YouTube page. Come back and visit it. Watch your favorite episode again. Share it with others. And just thank you for being an amazing partner. I think I saw Carly here. Carly was the showrunner before Jess, and the beautiful Ananya Mayuka was our founding showrunner. So thank you to every person. Somebody shouted out Rod Wallace, who wrote theme music. Hell, there's Curtis, who helped us turn it into a podcast, even though we didn't like fully get all that done. So many people that made this possible. So Jess, close us out with this beautiful video you made. And thank you, everyone. Michelle, so good to see you in person a week or so ago. That was beautiful. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, everyone. Take good care.
Take care. Thank you.